Welcome back to Smitty's Learning Room. Today we continue on with the dot point for Core 2, how can psychology affect performance? And we're specifically having a look at the psychological strategies to enhance motivation and manage anxiety. So when we have a look at the syllabus, we know we come to the focus question, how can psychology affect performance? Now remember that this is Core 2 for HSC, and we come down to the final dot point under this focus question, psychological strategies to enhance motivation and manage anxiety. Now in this video we're going to have a look at some of these strategies, including concentration and attention skills, so focusing, mental rehearsal, visualization and imagery, relaxation techniques, and goal setting. Now before we get started, remember that there are three areas to this focus question, how can psychology affect performance? We've got motivation, anxiety, and then we have physiological strategies to enhance motivation and manage anxiety. So make sure you go back and watch the two videos on motivation and anxiety before you watch this video if you haven't already done so. So we start by having a look at the first strategy for enhancing motivation and managing anxiety, and that is concentration or attention skills, or otherwise known as focusing. Now, this basically involves focusing on the relevant cues or elements that are specific to your performance rather than the outcome of the skills. So we break something down. So for example, in a basketball match, instead of focusing on I must win, you might break down that win or the game into 4 quarters, and then within each quarter you break that down to sort of be like, okay, well, what moves of play can I input or can I do to ensure that my team scores a point so that we can be ahead at the end of the first quarter. So breaking it down and concentrating on things that are specific to the performance rather than that final skill or the final outcome. So obviously here we need to have focus on elements such as your own thoughts, your own emotions, and your own actions before, during, and after performance. Now, concentration and attention skills can also include focusing on aspects that you know you can do well, as this breeds motivation and confidence and can reduce anxiety levels. Now, if we look at different concepts of focus and attention that we need for certain sports, if we have a look at an intense sort of amount of focus, these for sports such as golf, table tennis, or high jump, which have something that where athletes have to focus quite a lot on executing the skill. And then we have something that is, we look at sports that have a sustained attention, so sports that require the athlete to be attentive for quite a long period of time, and that's having a look at normally endurance sports such as marathons or Ironmans, or even a long distance cycling or swimming event. And then we have some sports which require both intense focus and sustained attention, and these are sports like football, netball, and rugby, because what they actually do is the athletes have to have intense focus for specific skills or particular parts of the game, but also need to make sure that they're sustaining their attention to be able to apply those skills for the full duration of the game or the time that they're on the field or court. So it's important to be able to understand some of the concentration and attention skills that you can do in relation to your sport, whether it's an intense focus or a sustained attention focus. The next aspect we have a look at in relation to psychological strategies to enhance motivation and manage anxiety is mental rehearsal, visualization, and imagery. Now these are sort of all the same sort of concepts but different sort of words and slightly different. Now the concept of this is basically, as an athlete, we picture things in our head, how things should be done. So for example, this little guy here in their swimming costume is a diver, and they're sort of thinking about the performance they're about to do and what they actually have to do to make that performance successful. And mental rehearsal, visualization and imagery is usually done just before the performance to help concentration. Now obviously that helping concentration is going to increase focus. It may decrease anxiety because the athlete is going through in their mind something that they know they can do and that they've done before and that they rehearse. So it's this concept of mental rehearsal, and they're visualizing their performance in their head. Now, it can be before the performance or game or throughout the performance. So for example, if it's a rugby player or a basketball player, they might be visualising the next movement or the next play that's going to happen down the court, and they can sort of put that play into image. And some athletes are better at doing this than others, but that's how they may have to do it throughout a performance rather than just before a performance. Now, applying these principles is really important for athletes of all levels because it helps the athlete prepare for competition. Now, athletes at a very early stage, so young athletes, might require their coach to help them visualise this concept of what they need to do, but a quite advanced athlete or an elite athlete will be able to have this mental rehearsal sort of down-packed and understand exactly what's required of them prior and during performance. Now, the beauty of these concepts of employing mental rehearsal and visualization and imagery is that it enhances an athlete's motivation and decreases anxiety by creating familiar environments for them to participate in. One thing that really increases anxiety for athletes is doing something that they haven't done before, and this is why mental rehearsal or visualization is such a great technique, because it allows athletes to visualize in their head what they have to do so that it's something that they've technically seen before, and it therefore allows the athlete to decrease the anxiety associated around that movement or the sport coming up. So the next thing we have a look at with the physiological strategies to enhance motivation and manage anxiety are relaxation techniques. Now, it's pretty obvious what these things do, and they're used to assist in the control of physical responses to stress or anxiety. So when our body is under some form of stress or anxiety, whether it's a perfect level of stress for us to be able to compete at a high level, or whether it's too much stress or we've gone past the level of optimum arousal and anxiety, our body responds in different ways, and we often have some physical changes that start to happen, and these can affect performance. So a technique that we can use for this is slow, deep breathing, and often this helps to overcome a fast breathing because our heart rates increase because of the level of stress and anxiety that we're faced due to an event that's coming up or a race that's about to start. And so by employing slow, deep breathing, we can try and calm down that fast breathing, and we can lower the heart rate again, ready for performance. One thing that can happen prior to performance as a result of managing or as a result of anxiety is that there's an increased adrenaline secretion, and how we deal with this is by stretching our muscles or doing a bit of a light sort of warm-up or a dynamic warm-up, and this helps to overcome the muscle tightness and also at the same time can prepare our body for the task it's about to complete. Another thing that we can do is apply a cool towel to the face and the body to decrease body temperature and sweating caused by stress and anxiety. So when our body's under quite a high level of stress and anxiety, we can become quite flustered, and obviously that increased heart rate increases the breathing and then causes our body to sweat. So we want to cool down and make sure we're at an appropriate temperature before we actually start performing, and a cool towel or sitting in the shade or sort of finding a way to cool down can actually help control our body temperature and therefore optimize our performance. The final aspect we look at in relation to physiological strategies to enhance motivation and manage anxiety is goal setting. Now, goal setting happens in all aspects of our lives, and we know by now that we're in Year 12 that setting goals need to be challenging yet realistic, and if they are challenging and realistic, that's really essential for managing anxiety. If an athlete doesn't have a goal, they could be under-aroused in relation to their performance or to their sport. If their goals are too challenging and not realistic, then that can also increase anxiety past the optimum arousal point. So when we set goals as an athlete or as a coach, we should make sure that the goals are process-based and related to factors the athlete can control. So for example, there's no point in trying to control the level of noise that the crowd is making before a performance to try and improve performance, because the athlete has no control over that. to set a goal around that might be, the athlete employing some breathing or visualization techniques to try and take their mind off the crowd at the time. So that's a goal that's specific to the athlete and what they can control, not an external factor. And then obviously trying to create short and long-term goals with specific time frames. So if we're constantly setting ourselves short-term goals, we're not quite sure what the big end picture is, or if we're constantly setting long-term goals, we don't have anything that's sort of a stepping stone to get to there, and athletes can lose motivation and interest because of that. Now, in relation to goal setting, self-talk can be used in a goal-setting manner, and this is something that can be used throughout the performance, prior performance and after, as it's great because it's an immediate goal. It's something that athlete can sort of say, this is what you're going to do, and it gets done straight away. And this technique is highly motivational due to the increased confidence and decreased anxiety. So if you have an athlete sort of doing some self-talk and visualization, they're able to really understand the task ahead of them. They can conceptualize the task and know what they're expected to do, and provide some motivation and confidence within themselves for that task in order to decrease anxiety around the upcoming event. So to wrap up the focus question, how can psychology affect performance? We have to remember that for an athlete to achieve peak performance, they must be prepared both mentally and physically. And this concept of mental preparation and psychological state of an athlete, building to sort of before the event, during and even after the event, can be impacted by lots of different things. So it's really important for the athletes to understand what positive and negative motivation is, where does the sources of motivation come from, are they motivated by intrinsic sources or extrinsic sources, and then having a look at anxiety, what triggers anxiety or stress for that athlete, what are the sources of them. Is it a trait anxiety within them, or is it something that's external that's being applied to them? And what techniques can they do, or what arousal raises or reduces can they do to ensure that they're performing at the optimum level of arousal? And then finally, what are some psychological strategies that athletes can do to enhance their motivation and manage their anxiety? So things around concentration and focusing skills, having a look at mental rehearsal, visualization, looking at relaxing techniques, and also goal setting to ensure that they are staying motivated and then managing the stress and anxiety during training and around their event.